Okay, here we are going to tackle Chapter 1, Lesson 3 in Advanced Algebra. And this lesson is on solving equations. And again, most of this should be somewhat review, hopefully. Um, but I will give you some tips, some things you have to be aware of when solving equations. I won't do any examples on this video. I will have another video where I will do some just examples of the types of problems that you'll have to do for the homework. So I'm going to go through this. Hopefully it shouldn't take that long, and then you can look at some of the video for some of the examples. Because we're going to be solving equations, maybe something you haven't done before. Solving equations using with just letters. There aren't going to be any numbers at all. So there's going to be just letters involved. But it's important to realize that whether it's numbers or letters, there's no difference. You apply the same properties, you apply the same rules, you do the same things you would do whether you're using numbers or letters. And that's because numbers are just symbols that we use to represent an idea, and letters are just symbols as well. So whether we use numbers or letters, it really doesn't matter. The only uncomfortable part becomes, or is, we're not used to working with letters. And we get confused because we think, oh, well, if numbers were here, I'd do something more, and these numbers would become this nice little package for me. And letters don't become these nice little packages, and so we just can't do as much as we could with numbers, but we really do the same thing. We just can't go as far. So keep that in mind. The properties for solving equations never change. Okay, so let's look at solving equations. Now again, it's important that you understand the vocabulary. Remember, we talked about evaluating an expression, and how do we evaluate? What are the two words we have to remember? I can hear you. Substitute, right? And then simplify. And then we had simplifying an algebraic expression was where we would add like terms. Okay? Now here, solving, it's another word. We say it a lot, but you really need to know what it means. And solving means to determine a number that if you substituted that number into the equation that you're looking at, then you would be able to, it would make that equation true. So solving now is we're actually trying to find the value of the variable. What number could I substitute into the expression that would make that equation true? Now, one very important thing I want you to make note of here. You can only solve if there's an equal sign. Okay, all these ones we were doing before, those evaluating and simplifying, if you go back and look, there weren't any equal signs. So if there's no equal sign, if you don't know what the expression is equal to, there's no way to find out what the number should be that goes in for x or for y or whatever. So just kind of keep that in mind. Solving must have an equal sign. It must be an equation, otherwise you can't solve it. And for when we are solving, we're trying to figure out what the value is for that variable that we could put in the equation, which if we evaluated then with that number, evaluated, substituted, and simplify, the equation would end up being the same, or it would be a true statement. The solution then of the equation, this is what we're looking for, is the number that you find. So if I ask you what's the solution to the equation, what you need to think about is, what is he asking me? What does he mean, the solution? Oh, right. He's looking for the number that I could substitute into this expression and it would make it true. Okay, so that's the solution. Okay, so that's what we'll be looking for. So for instance, a very quick example, 2x is equal to 4, solve it. That means find the number that I could put in for x that would make this true. To solve it, we all know we divide by 2. So 2 is the solution because if I put 2 in for x, if I evaluated this equation with the number 2, it would come out to be true. 4 would be equal to 4. Okay, so that's what solving is all about. Okay, to solve an equation, you use these properties of equalities. You've seen them before, and properties of equality simply means that you use these when you are working with an equation. Properties of equality, meaning you have an equation. Notice all of these properties, there's an equal sign down here. All of these have an equal sign because these only apply if we have equal sign. And again, basically it comes down to this. What you do to one side, you have to do to the other. You can add the same thing to both sides, subtract the same thing from both sides, multiply everything by the same number, divide everything by the same number. Okay, all of those properties you've seen before. These other properties we use from time to time, and we'll talk about them when we use them. Okay? All right, so some tips. Now here's something you need to know. In order to solve an equation, to get very good at it, you need to follow these 4 things that I'm going to give you, and follow them in this order. The first thing that you want to do when you come to an equation is to simplify each side of the expression. Now remember, simplify means what? We add like terms. So you look at one side of the equation and you simplify it. You add all the like terms that you can, and then you look at the other side of the equation and you simplify that side. You add all the like terms that you can. Sometimes you may need to distribute first, so you want to do that. But simplify both sides separately. Don't be doing this side-to-side thing yet. Okay, that comes after you simplify. So simplify each side first. Okay. Once you've done that, then you want to find the variable that you're solving for, if you're asked to solve for x, and you want to gather or remove all the different terms that have that variable in them to one side. Okay, so sometimes they're already on one side, sometimes you get them on both sides, but you want to move them so that all of the variables, the one that you're solving for, every term that has that variable in it, is all on one side. And you can kind of plan ahead here. If you can see, look at the coefficients, you know you're going to add them together because they're like terms. You can look ahead and see if you're going to add them on this side and it's going to be a negative, well, just move it to the other side, and then that way it'll stay positive. So you can just avoid dividing by a negative. But it really doesn't matter. The next thing is something I'm going to really preach all year long. It's something that I want you to get good at, and that is to, once you get to this step here, you've simplified both sides, you've moved the variables to one side, then remove the fractions. And we remove the fractions by multiplying by the least common denominator. I'll talk about that in another video if you want to look at that. I'll cover one example here real quickly, but it really will make your life a lot easier if you will remove the fractions, because it's a lot easier to remove the fractions than it is a lot of times to find the common denominator, add them together, and continue to work with fractions all the way through. So removing the fractions can save you some headaches. And one thing that I need you to remember, oh, please remember this, please remember that, dividing will always be the last thing you do. If you divide and then you're going on and doing something else, you're going to be wrong. You cannot divide somewhere earlier in the problem. It's not going to turn out well. And this is going to be a problem that happens when we go to working with just variables, because you're going to want to get rid of the other letters, and you know that you want to divide, but you're going to be dividing in your first step or your second step, and then you're going to be trying to do more after that, and it's going to be a mess. So please, please, please take special note of this. Dividing will always be the last thing you do. If you find yourself doing more steps after you've divided, you might as well just stop, because you're doing it wrong, okay? You're not going to end up well. So dividing will always be the last step. So if you follow these 4 steps, then solving equations should be pretty easy for you, and you should be pretty good at this. Okay, I'm going to do one equation really quickly with removing fractions so you kind of see what I mean. Now, here we have an equation where I have x over 2 plus x over 5 plus x over 3 equals 31. And this is going to scare a lot of people, because how do you add all these fractions? You've got to find common denominators. Well, there's a way to get rid of these fractions. And it's by applying the multiplication property of equality. If you go back a couple slides, you'll see it in there. And it says that I can multiply this equation by anything I want, as long as I do it to every single term that's in the equation. So what I want to do is find the least common denominator of 2, 5, and 3. In other words, what number does 2 divide into evenly, 5 divided into evenly, and 3 divided into evenly? Okay, and the least common denominator here is 30. 30 is divisible by 2, 30 is divisible by 5, 30 is divisible by 10. So if I multiply everything, so if I multiply this first fraction by 30, and I multiply this second fraction by 30, and I multiply this third fraction by 30, and I multiply this number by 30, as long as I do it to everything, property of equality says I can do that, you'll see that all my fractions are going to go away, because you remember, let me just do the first fraction out here. If I'm multiplying 30, which is the same as 30 over 1, times x over 2, this 2 is going to reduce with this 30, leaving me 15. So it's going to be 15 times x, which is 15x over 1. That fraction is going to go away. And because I'm multiplying by a number that each one of these will divide evenly into, all of these denominators are going to reduce. So when I do that, I'm going to end up with this. Okay, now you look, I've got a nice equation, no fractions. Now I can go ahead and finish up. So I add my like terms over here, and then I go ahead and divide, and I get x is 30. That's my answer. So you can get rid of the fractions by multiplying by the least common denominator. Check out another video. I will do some more of those, especially the ones when you're doing just variables. And notice one last thing here. What did I do last? Divide. Dividing was my last step. I didn't do anything after that, and that is my final answer. Okay, so that pretty much covers this lesson. We're going to talk about restrictions on the next lesson. And divide this into two. Watch the next video. It's going to be on solving equations with all letters, and then looking at what we call restrictions. So check that out on the next video.